Since Halloween is approaching, there is no better time to talk about the second season of Wednesday, one of the greatest Netflix series presented to us by the brilliant Tim Burton. Hi, I'm Stellian, storyteller, lightworker, authenticity alchemist, and we're going to examine another TV series that brings us spiritual elements that is supporting us on our ascension journey in 2025. So, the very first thing that made an impression on me watching the second season of Wednesday was the introduction of spirit guides. And this is really important because when we begin awakening and ascending, we're going to start receiving guidance. And some of that guidance is going to come directly from us and our higher self. But every now and then, it might come from a spirit guide. And we're going to recognize that it's somewhat of a different presence that is guiding us. But that presence is going to become familiar to us, which is what we can call a spirit guide. Every now and then, we might be able to choose our own spirit guides when we recognize a certain element that we want to learn or a certain element, certain value that we want to implement on our journey. For example, for truth tellers and messengers of the truth, divine messengers, messengers of justice on earth, justice rights fighters, they might recognize Archangel Michael as a guiding light on their journey and seek counsel within Michael, and therefore begin to work with Archangel Michael as their spirit guide.
This isn't hell, Miss Adams, but I understand the confusion.
If I'm not dead, then why are you here?
Because I am your new spirit guide. Surprise!
It's a little bit like that. One day you wake up and you recognize, oh, there is an assistance here. There is some force that's assisting me. And for the everyday person that's not part of a Tim Burton show, a spirit guide might speak to you through other people, which has happened to me. And I'm not quite sure if it was a spirit guide or if it was my own higher self, but I've recognized moments where I was talking to someone and the way that they were talking to me changed. Their tone changed, their facial expression changed, and also the energy that they embodied changed. And suddenly I felt myself more present. My presence increased and all my senses were activated so that I can sense the information with my senses and with the higher chakras. Therefore, recognizing that there is not only a different presence in the person that's talking to me, but also that they're delivering a message that I must hear now because it's going to assist me on my journey. And these were often messages that guided me to believe in myself in moments when I didn't see a way out of a situation or I didn't see a different point of view. So whenever these messengers on my path arrived with their messages, essentially they guided me back to my own higher self by increasing my understanding of the situation or by reminding me that I am capable of handling it if it's on my path at this very moment. So the spirit guides element of the storytelling in season 2 is priceless. The fact that we were given a little bit of the blueprint as to what happens when we begin to awaken and ascend, even if it was part of a storyline that had nothing to do with awakening and ascension. However, Wednesday definitely showed us what it means to activate spiritual gifts, and it showed us some of the spiritual gifts, like clairvoyance, clairaudience, and it did something very important in season 2. It showed us what the loss of psychic gifts or abilities looks like, what a temporary freeze looks like, which is what the Lightworker overwhelm is essentially. When you begin to use your powers, your gifts, and you begin to use them and rely on them exclusively day after day, night after night, because you believe that you have to give and give and give, that you feel a sense of responsibility and also a little bit of detachment from the present moment because you pursue the higher calling, the higher meaning, the higher purpose, and that drives you to obsession, to mania.
She's got a point.
Stay out of this. Who are you talking to?
You might experience this when you get too focused on being of service and using your gifts, even if it is to do good. In the case of Wednesday, we saw her at the very beginning of season 2 that she wanted to catch a serial killer and bring justice because the system wasn't able to do that. It can be very tempting to use your gifts for good and begin to go off script because your gifts are activated for you to accomplish specific soul contracts, specific missions, specific requirement. There are certain requirements that come with the activation of your gifts. Again, look at season 1. There was definitely a clear mission. Wednesday was placed in a scenario where she would become the cycle breaker, the generational curse breaker, and she would be instrumental to break this spell, this curse, by being there with her gifts, with her presence, with her belief system. Because she was unbreakable precisely because of her belief system. And then her gifts supported her, of course. She was given instructions consistently. She was given visions to prepare her for the moment where she would complete the soul contract or the mission. In season 2, she went off script. She was looking for the thrill of being of service with her gifts, which is where, this is where the obsession comes. This is where wanting to be in control of your life becomes the driving force versus trusting the divine and trusting that you were given those gifts for a reason.
I know what those tears mean. It's psychic exhaustion. That's what happens when you abuse your gift.
This is a temporary freeze, or that's how I like to call it. It's when the overwhelm or the burnout from using your gifts takes over. And it's usually driven by the spirit realm. The spirit realm recognizes that you're no longer learning, that you're no longer participating, you're no longer part of the social structures of life, and you're here to have a human experience. You're not just here to be some sort of spiritual warrior that's here to fight these invisible battles, while the everyday person that's a dummy that, participates in life by building a family and having children and going to their 9 to 5 job. No, you're meant to be part of the everyday life of Earth while also having your gifts to support Earth in crucial moments. When some of these spells, it's time for them to wear off and be taken away from the matrix, whether it's a spiritual matrix or a spiritual matrix that has effects and manifestations into the physical matrix.
Your ability is not a weapon to be deployed, it's a gift to be respected.
So we saw that the loss of psychic gifts or psychic abilities at a temporary basis when you overwhelm yourself. This is the spiritual equivalent of burnout, essentially. One more example I'll give you is if you're doing tarot readings, oracle card readings, you might experience a temporary freeze that's not necessarily losing your abilities, but rather you get on a temporary freeze so that you don't actively practice the reading, so that you disconnect from the energy or the habit of reading cards, of relying on the cards, so that there are other gifts that you strengthen, other connections that you strengthen, or other habits that you build so that your presence is taken out of these familiar habits, even if they take you out of your comfort zone, and that you go outside into the real world and you meet new people, or simply you go outside and you do things. The idea of delivering readings is that you return to your sacred space, which is beautiful, that you have that space dedicated to giving readings and supporting the ascension and supporting people that want assistance and they don't have the answers or they don't have anyone to talk to about certain questions. But every now and then you might get overly addicted to it because it keeps you in control. And this is one of the lessons. I know on Wednesday we saw that she was put on a temporary freeze because she was avoiding doing the inner work. She was avoiding doing the emotional work, which is essential for anyone. If they want to overcome the trauma, if they want to break the generational cycles, if they want to be a light worker, if they want to be of service, a good leader, a very balanced human being in today's world. So she wasn't doing the inner work necessary. She was pushing herself to her limits, practicing or rather relying entirely on her gifts to be of service. And this was a lesson that she had to learn, a lesson that many light workers are learning right now. You're not supposed to maximize the time spent with your gifts once they're active by minimizing the time that you spend reflecting and doing the inner work to recondition your subconscious mind to re-examine the traumas, the triggers. You're not supposed to avoid the uncomfortable emotions, but rather you're supposed to understand why they're still uncomfortable. That's how you become a balanced being that can then bring that balance into their use of their spiritual gifts. And so we saw that in Wednesday's case, she had a troubled relationship with her mother. Instead of working on that relationship, she wanted to focus on the higher purpose and the higher calling without realizing that this troubled relationship was a piece of the puzzle. It was a clue. It was a key to help her unlock more. It's like a door that's once unlocked, it allows you to pass through. And when you pass through, you gain understanding as to why you're experiencing this emotional turmoil, especially at the level of the family.
I'm not your enemy. I am your mother.
So if you have any complicated relationships with family members, with friends, don't avoid the uncomfortableness. Examine them further. There you will find more of the passage necessary for you to gain sovereignty during your time on earth and for you to master yourself and understand how to truly be of service. And sometimes being of service isn't necessarily using your intuitive gifts to catch a murderer, in the case of Wednesday, or to break some sort of generational massive spell, but rather to be there for people that didn't have anyone to be next to them. That's how you change a story. That's how you change a curse before it becomes a curse. You break the pattern before it becomes a pattern. And in the case of Wednesday, she was there next to Enid, and vice versa. And the final thing that Wednesday showed us, season 2 of Wednesday, was the loss of psychic power. Not gifts, power. So the permanent deactivation of your spiritual powers, which was in the case of Wednesday's father. Spoiler alert. Wednesday's father experienced a backfire when he was attacked. Essentially, he was a very powerful wizard, magician. He had great powers, and somebody wanted to use his powers to power his own vision for the future. And in a way, he sacrificed himself. Spiritually speaking, looking at the grander picture, he sacrificed himself. He was the one to take all that might onto him to collect the negative energy and prevent it from spreading further. However, because this was such a huge attack, a little bit like we saw in Stranger Things, when Eleven wanted to close the gate, she used so much of her battery life that her powers disappeared. Well, the same thing happened to Wednesday's father. He used so much of his potency to stop this human being that was using his powers to do bad things, essentially, in the world, to power his evil plan, even though in his mind it didn't seem so evil, which was a little bit like instant karma delivered. And you might think instant karma is when you do something bad and the other person that's doing the bad thing, the karma goes to them. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it backfires. So the instant karma went to Gomez, Wednesday's father, and he completely lost his psychic power. This wasn't just about a gift or two and the temporary freeze. This was a permanent deactivation. Now, one might speculate, because we're yet to see season 3, maybe season 4, 5, that his gifts are not permanently deactivated and that there is still a chance and a time for him to reactivate them once, his battery has been rebooted, recharged. We've seen that. We saw it both in Stranger Things and we saw it in The Wheel of Time when the main character loses the abilities due to extreme exhaustion, but then the gifts return. Again, one might speculate, both in the case of Stranger Things, The Wheel of Time, and even Wednesday, these were female characters. Therefore, they had the feminine advantage of being more intuitively charged, more intuitively developed, connected to source, which is why they were able to reboot the battery that is within them to sustain that energy again, because the energy is not destroyed, it's just transformed.
I'm not saying anything. my ability. It's not working.
We can speculate further, but yeah, I love that in season 2 we got to see more spiritual lessons. The introduction of spirit guides and how spirit guides can assist us, and how our past loved ones might become spirit guides even during our lifetime. There don't have to be, multiple decades, multiple generations for a passed on loved one to return and guide us. We saw the loss of psychic gifts as a temporary freeze due to burnout, due to extreme exhaustion, due to not treating your gifts with the respect and appreciation that they deserve, but also not treating your human life with the appreciation and respect that it deserves, as well as fellow human beings. And finally, we saw the loss of psychic power, which is the permanent deactivation of one's spiritual body, self, abilities. This is probably the most painful one, especially we saw that in Stranger Things. We saw it in The Wheel of Time. It is very closely tied to one's identity, especially once you've been a wizard, a magician, an alchemist, a light worker for many decades, for many years, and that gift is being taken away from you. It's a little bit like part of your identity dies. But there is more to your identity than just your spiritual identity, which is where I think Gomez has given us, again, part of the blueprint. What happens if this happens to happen to any of us in the future, or if it has happened before? Because I personally was disconnected from my own consciousness for a couple of years, around a decade. And during that time, I kept learning, I kept studying, I kept trusting the signs on my journey, trusting the messengers, even when I had no clue about any of the things that I'm working with right now, such as astrology and tarot cards and spiritual knowledge. All of that was so far away from me. But at the time, it wasn't part of my identity anyway. So that being taken away from me, it didn't destroy me and my identity. In fact, it allowed me to keep on getting to know myself and keep building on the things that I can be during this lifetime before, some of the existing identity in me reawakened, or I summoned it back. Doesn't matter how it goes, really. But yeah, there's more to us than just our spiritual abilities. And once we discover our spiritual abilities, we get to become more of ourselves equally. How did you react to seeing spirit guides in season 2 of Wednesday? What else did season 2 remind you of? What did you learn from season 2? Leave your comments below. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.